Shahbaz, welcome to my book Cineinkpodcast podcast show. Uh, you have been described as a businessman for a long time. Now you are, talked about as an author. Which title suits you better?
Uh, I like both of them. The reason that I wrote this book was so I would be in the same company as my grandfather and my father, and that means a lot to me personally. And of course, business wise, I'm trained. My brother and I were trained by Abba to, take over his businesses. We worked under him, and so both the titles hold equal meaning for me personally. But the author one is it's something that I'm getting used to. It's a wonderful compliment, especially if it comes from a place where people enjoyed the book. And, as a writer, it's the only thing you want is to connect with the reader, for them to, for you to have articulated your experience in a way that they can relate to it. And it's a lovely gift, actually. It's the best gift that I've gotten, from my freedom besides my children, is this title of author.
I'm so happy you talked about your grandfather. Grandfather Mohd Din Taseer. In short, he's known as MD Taseer, a legendary scholar from South Asia region, someone who went on to do his PhD in literature, very kind of a unique, distinction
Ji.
during those
He
days
was actually
before.
the first Indian to do it from the subcontinent. So
Right,
it's a honor, actually, that's in
indeed. Okay, so what have you been told about him, Senior Taseer Sahab, MD Taseer Sahab? What was his contribution to the literature?
So I have to tell you that how there's parents are involved in your education from when you're a child, and I think usually that's very academic oriented. But my mother used to look after the academic side of our education, and my father, I think maybe 1 or 2 years he took out to specifically concentrate with me on my academics. But other than that, my brother and I would sit every day with him, and we would have history lectures, physics lectures, poetry lessons. We would be given books to read that had nothing to do with our curriculum or our age, as a matter of fact. I mean, I read Nelson Mandela's memoir when I was, I think, 12 or 13. And in a similar way, the first Urdu book that I read was my grandfather's book of poems, and we had to memorize some of them. As little kids, it was very difficult. थोड़े से वो हम अमेरिकन स्कूल जाते थे, सो शर्माते भी थे उर्दू बोलने से. बड़ी ये ज़िंदगी में, much later on in our lives did we become very proud of this language and the part that it plays in our life. I was 21 and I actually held a gathering that my father helped me organize at the governor's house. He was the governor at the time, so he helped me. But what I wanted to do was to get all these very famous artists together and to recite my Dada's poetry for an audience. And we recorded it, as a matter of fact. And again, in the little personal accomplishments in your life, it was one of my most amazing moments, because not only did I make my father proud, but I managed to get all these people to sit down and listen to Dada's poetry, sung by modern artists, and it was a wonderful experience. So, growing up, my grandfather, in this house, we were told that this name that you have is one that your grandfather took. It was his name as a scholar. It was his name as a poet, as a writer. And honoring this name is something that has been embedded in all of the children, all of my father's children, all of his grandchildren. And each one, if you ever meet us, you're very proud to be a Taseer. And that comes from Dada.
And briefly, I think for those who probably do not know, Senior Taseer's connection with Faiz Ahmad Faiz Sahab,
He was
the
my Khala
great,
Dadu.
absolutely legendary poet. So, yes, share some of those details as well. Who was married to whom?
So Dada was married to Christobel, and Faiz Dada was married to Alys Dadi, and basically, she was my father's khala. So he was his khalu, and mere liye to he was, I call him Khalu Dada, but he named myself and my younger brother, or played a part in naming us. Abba, was quite proud of naming us as well. But he was my grandfather died with Abba was very young, maybe 6 years. He was 4 or 6 years old, and so he grew up with just stories about his own father, and he didn't know him that well. And he learnt about him not just through my dadi, but through his best friend, who was Faiz Ahmad Faiz. And what a wonderful way to learn about your father, and have Faiz Ahmad Faiz be his best friend, and his, comrade, through life. And so, Abba had a very high standard that he set for himself because of who his father was. And he set those standards for his children because of who their grandfather was. Being the first man from the subcontinent to do your PhD in English literature from Cambridge is as amazing as it sounds, and education wise, work ethic wise, in any way of our lives, it's very much been part of it. And Faiz, Dada, what nobody knows about is all of Abba's political beliefs and his struggles and some of his convictions and some of the things that he fought for and some of the things that he stood for and some of the things that he ended up giving his life for. It all came from this revolutionary. So he is the man who molded Salman Taseer and educated Salman Taseer. And when he ran the Pakistan Times, when Abba opened the Daily Times with Najm Sethi, this is the dynamic duo that they wanted to be, was Faiz Ahmad Faiz and Mia Iftikharuddin. So these were the people that they aspired to be like.
And this is an amazing backdrop of your family. शाहबाज, कहते हैं ना कि फ़ख्र होता है ऐसे ख़ानदान में पैदा होना और उसके बाद में ऐसे-ऐसे लोग जिनके आस-पास आप पले-बड़े हों। Coming back to your father, Salman Taseer Sahab, he was a politician before becoming the governor of Punjab, and he used to work for the Pakistan People's Party.
Yes. Well, he gave up politics in the 90s, and he was a businessman before he was a politician as well. He gave up his businesses to come to Pakistan and fight against Ziaul Haq, and it was a very difficult battle. It was a battle in which he didn't just sacrifice all the things that he created, but also a lot of years of his life, life, his family itself. It was a very difficult 10, 12 years of his life. And then he went into business. And again, I think he had incredible success as a businessman, which is why he was invited to be the governor. And then, he had lots of hopes and he wanted to do so many things. And that was his real passion, by the way. I can go on about his business side of things. I think that was a need. He always said that this is something I have to do every day to survive, because I didn't inherit anything in my life. So I've only had to create to sustain myself. But his love was politics. And that's where he felt like Salman Taseer.
Like Salman Taseer. And if I may, be allowed to, please go ahead. Um, so let me come to the year 2011, when your father Salman Taseer was assassinated by his own guard. Um, what were you doing at the time? Where were you?
Um, it's very difficult. I was actually on the phone with him. He was in Kosar Market, yeah, and he just eaten his soup at his famous. There's a famous little restaurant in Kosar Market, and he had his soup, and he was actually talking to my mother. It was my younger brother's birthday, so I had come home from office early. I'd bought my brother an Xbox, and Abba was supposed to come at night, and we were having like a dinner, and we were all really excited. So when I walked into my mother's room, she was on the phone on loudspeaker with Abba. And I just said, "Can you give me the phone?" And I took the phone and I was like, "I heard your government's going." So he started laughing and he's like, "Why?" I used to say your government because I was a PMLQ supporter. I voted for.
Okay.
So I voted for PMLQ, and my father was just like wanted to kill me. I couldn't believe it. So I said, I heard your government is going. The MQM is resigning from the assemblies, and your government is on its way. So he laughed and he said कि ये जो भी कर लें हमारी हुकूमत 5 साल पूरे ख़त्म करेगी. And anyways, then I said, when are you coming home? He said, I'm just grabbing a book, and I'm going to the house, packing up, and I'm heading for Lahore. And I gave the phone to my mother, and I just walked out of her room and walked out into my garage, and I got a call from my khala. It literally 25, 30 seconds. And she said, there's been a bomb blast in Kosar market. And is your father okay? And I said, that's ridiculous. See, the haunting thing about that conversation was that I knew he was in Kosar market. So the fact that she called me 30 seconds later and said that there's been a blast, I couldn't actually, I couldn't put it together. But I had so much hope because I had just been on the phone with him. And I ran back into my mother's room and she wasn't on the phone with him and she was reading a magazine. And I said, when did you get off the phone with Abba? And she said, I just shut it. As soon as you left the room, I shut the phone. And so I said, call him. And she called him and his phone was ringing, but he didn't pick up. And when she called him again, it was off. And then I called his military secretary, very nice man. And he basically, when I called him, the first thing he said to me is, I've heard as well and I'm on it. And that's when this, you know, very strange feeling that I've, as a son, they say that, my parents would always tell me that the worst thing that can happen to a parent is to bury their child. But I've never been able to just, what happened that day with my dad, because that's what he was for me. I'm always asked about his politics and his business and the amazing man that he was, and he was a phenomenal man. I'm so by the way, one of the most amazing privileges of my life has been this time that I've managed to spend with him in such a personal capacity as his son. You only realize it when they're gone. But I then received a call maybe 10, 15 minutes later. The TVs were on. There were reports that he'd been shot at, and was being rushed to the hospital. And we were on a phone call getting information. And Abba's friends were coming to the house. Mama's friends started coming. And I just, kept thinking, this is not a funeral. Why are you coming like this? My father's going to be fine. Because he was such a huge figure. Really, he was larger than life. Anything that someone can say about him is not enough. It can never explain the kind of larger than life character he was. And I'll never forget, the colonel called me and said that we're bringing him to Lahore. And these were his words. And I said, are you mad? I'm catching the next plane to Islamabad, and he needs the best medical care that he can get right now, and we're on our way. And he said, Shahbaz, we're bringing his body. And I'll never forget, because I was actually standing in a place that I spent so much time with my father. And it's our courtyard in our house outside my father's bedroom. And every morning, as a 16-year-old, he basically saw that he's having a little bit too much fun in life. So what he did was, he said that you will wake up at 7:30 every morning and you will have breakfast with me and read the newspapers with me. And the only thing that I'll ensure through this exercise is that you'll be asleep at a time where you can't get up to any godforsaken harkats that young boys do in school and stuff. But what it turned out to be was like an extra university, like another bachelor's degree in life, literally, because I would discuss politics. I was telling you, anyways, we discussed history, but it was just extra time with him, and he would be strategizing about business. And I just spent so many years of my life in that courtyard every single morning with him. And it was a very difficult call. And then the worst part about the call was not just that I had to digest this information, but I could see across the courtyard my mother and my younger brother and my younger sister sitting there with no idea of what's happening. And I had to go and do this. And, I say this to people that as someone who's been kidnapped and extensively tortured and kept in, solitary confinement, this is the hardest thing that I've ever had to do in my life. And I said goodbye to my mother and been at peace with saying goodbye to her. But it's just, and it's a wound that never heals. I have a sense of triumph over my own experience, my kidnapping, my torturers, my abductors. I have a huge sense of pride and a sense of you know triumph. I've won. I've won over here. But when I speak about my father, or I speak about that day, it's a wound that never heals, and it's really.
And the saddest part is, you said the hardest thing for you, of course, was his funeral and the way you received the news of his death and assassination. For me, the saddest thing is that he was killed because he raised his voice to defend a girl called Asiya Bibi.
So, this is all about wanted. He just wanted a debate about the amendment of laws because, as Asiya Bibi's case proved, it's a historic case because it can be used as a precedent anywhere, not just Pakistan, but anywhere. If a religious minority is being persecuted, this case it's a Supreme Court case. So what happens is inside Asiya Bibi's case is very important because what it says is the woman committed no act of blasphemy. She was wrongly accused of committing blasphemy, and that the man murdered was doing his job, which, as the governor of Punjab, is to protect the weak. That is his constant. He has sworn with his hand on the Quran to uphold the Constitution of Pakistan, and this is one of those things that he is committed to. Is to protect. Actually, the problem is that when we see politicians, when we see opportunity, contracts, and this and that, and corruption and this, but really their job is, like I mentioned, to uplift and to help the weakest of our society. So it's an unbelievable judgment in that case. And what it's done is, I'll never get any. You can never make me feel bad, But my father didn't die for me, and so that's why I also have to look at my wins in perspective. And this judgment is a huge win for my father, because what it does is it not only sets a precedent, but it also claims that he was wrongfully murdered. And anyone who there's a reason why laws are there, police is there, courts are there. You have to go there. You cannot accuse someone in the streets, make up your mind, and decide to kill them. So, personally, it's a huge tragedy, but as a Pakistani, this decision is historic and monumental for us.
Very historic. And it was the same year, 2011, when your father was assassinated. After about his death, about about 7 months later, something happened to you. um, just share some of those details, please, because I know it's horrendous to talk about those things again and again, but you have written a book. It's important for you also to talk about it. It's equally important for me and for millions of people to understand how it works, what had happened, how did you feel, and how did you come out of that. I think that's a brilliant story, and your book is fascinating. And I have spoken to a number of people who have read your book, and or the details about the book, and they are amazed. And they want you to share your story in person, of course, in vision and audio as well.
Um, it was such a because I do it every day. I go to work the same place. I live in the same house. So for me, it's like part of my routine. and it was an ordinary day for me, just like any other day. Like today, I've come home a little early for this, but I take the same road to work, the same car to work, and I'll never forget. So I was on my way to work. I'd come back from Dubai, and it was 9:45 in the morning. I was actually a little late, and as I was turning, my office is on MM Alam Road, which, if you've ever been to Lahore, it's like the main commercial road. All the brands are there, all the offices are there, all the multinationals are there. And so mine is the first turn, and I literally took the turn and went into the side lane, and I was jumped by 10 masked men with guns, and I just thought it's a car. I had a fancy car, so I thought, run. Today is that day. You always hear about stories in Karachi, but very rarely in Lahore. But anyways, I thought, that today is your lucky day to get carjacked. And so I took my key. I actually dropped the key on the side, but I had my wallet, I had a watch. I just started saying, "Take all of this. There's no need." They instantly started hitting me with the Kalashnikovs and directing me towards the car that was in the front. And I was following instructions. I had my hands up. The only thing I did was my car had a start button, so I put it off and I slipped the key in the side pocket because I really did love the car and I didn't want them to succeed in taking it. Anyways, as I got into their vehicle and they sped off, they were kicking me and gun butting me. So I said, "Listen, there's no need for this. I've given you money. I've given you my watch. You've got the car. Just drop me on the side, and I'm not even going to go to the police, man. Take 3 4 days, relax." And the guy in the front seat, who turned out to be my kidnapper, his name was Muhammad Ali, and he was an Uzbek. And he turned back and he looked at me and he spoke in perfect Urdu. He said, "Shahbaz, main tumhare liye aaya hu. Shahbaz, I've come for you." And really, it's some I can never explain. I just before getting off that plane from Dubai, I'd watched A Mighty Heart, which is about Daniel Pearl. Why I decided to watch that, I have no idea. But this is the last movie I'd seen, and literally just gotten off the plane. And I just, you have this horror, and the entire story had just played in front of me, and I knew that there's the only reason he knows who I am is because he's, and the 7 months that we'd spent in Pakistan after Abbas' murder were not easy either, and we were getting continuous, constant death threats, and my younger sister was sent these pictures of beheaded people in her mail, and when she opened it, it was just pictures of beheaded people with a note saying, "You're next." And my mother had a grenade thrown outside her office, and without a pin, so it was like a warning. It was very difficult, and then you had these very illiterate and uneducated people creating a narrative on the media. I'll never forget a lot of politicians who didn't, shying away. I can respect because of the intensity of the issue, but cowardly behavior, ran for the hills, as a matter of fact, and it's very demoralizing, um, because we refused to leave the country as well. We got the Americans offered us a refugee. My brother and I just refused. We said, I would rather die. Uh, you know,
When was this? When were they
this was
offered?
before I was kidnapped.
Before your kidnapping, after your father's assassination, yeah?
Fascinating.
Because it was felt somehow, somewhere, that your family was not safe. Is that correct to say?
Yeah. That was. I mean, whether it was the intelligence agencies, whether it was the government, whether it was, ambassadors from different country, council general. I mean, they all were literally begging us that do not understand how dangerous the situation is. We are getting, reports from our intelligence agencies about, like, just think about every single person in this country is targeting you, that can target you is targeting you. So that's scary because we were fighting a full-on war on terror. You could see what was happening with the suicide blasts and things like this, and it was very unnerving. Like uh, before I got kidnapped, even stopping at a traffic light, I'd start because people on motorcycles and कोई आपको गलत तरह like just look at you the wrong way and you are thinking more in your head because of your personal situation than what's actually. But turned out that 7 months into after Abba died, I was abducted by, and not just a, like they're in the militant hierarchy. There's so many people that could take you, but I got picked up by the worst, which is this Uzbeks. And even if you speak to people in Pakistani intelligence or in the US intelligence, they will tell you that they are the they are just not human beings.
They were the Uzbek fighters, Uzbek terrorists, or whatever, or Uzbek
So they're
Taliban.
mainly Central Asians. So the Uzbeks had their own group. It was called the IMU, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, or Uzbekistan Islami Harakat. Um, and basically, it was a group of Central Asians, mainly Uzbeks. It was founded by an Uzbek called Muhammad Tahir Farooq, who was in again the hierarchy of terrorists. He was more senior than Osama bin Laden, and he's actually the
Really?
reason for the Iraq insurgency. Yes, so he was Baitullah Masood's mentor. So the Pakistan insurgency, the Iraq insurgency, he was the mentor of both the men that started it, and he was Mullah Umar's most important, one of his most important outside of his direct Taliban circle, because this was another group. And he was Amirul Mahajirin. So Mullah Umar was Amirul Momineen, as in the Amir of all the Muslims, and he was the Amirul Mahajirin, the Amir of all the immigrants inside the caliphate. And so it's a very senior position in the world of crazy people, as I used to joke. So he was a very senior guy, and so the group had a very high standing amongst the Afghan Taliban, who in the terrorist world are the number one. ISIS, Al Qaeda, they might be operating internationally, and they might have carved, like ISIS has obviously carved out land. But what the Taliban have done in Afghanistan, no other, you can't even call them a group anymore now. They're a government. Now they're
Yeah.
officially a government. So they're not even a group. They're not a terrorist group. So, to be in such a high standing position in a place like this, the Uzbeks were, frontline fighters, frontline suicide bombers, gave the fatwas for beheadings, introduced that walkie-talkie that they all use, jisko mukhabra kehte hain. The Uzbeks introduced, explained to them how to use it, because they've been at war since
No,
the
I'm
70s.
just trying to understand what were they doing in Lahore? They just came to kidnap you, otherwise they were based somewhere
Yes.
else.
No, so they're based. All of these groups at the time of my kidnapping were operating from Mirali and Miransha, which are two cities inside Waziristan in Pakistan. And this is a very no-go area. It is a war zone, and the military is actually has been fighting against these people since since it cleared Swat, since it cleared Gilgit. Then this is where these people came. So this insurgency that it started, I think, in 2005, and by 2006, 2007, 2011, they had moved these people into Miransha, Mirali. This was the region where they ran and operated, and not one group, hundreds of groups. Lashkar-e Jangvi, Afghan Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, the Uzbeks. Then there were other groups, like the Chechens had their own groups. The Somalian Al Qaeda was, different. The Uyghurs had a group. The Tajiks had a group. The Kyrgyz had a group. There were people from places. There was a South Korean in my group who negotiated with my mother. I mean, there were people like this was more vibrant and international than Islamabad, but just, unfortunately, it was crazies. So, what I wanted to just finish really quick was, so all of these groups that operated from Mirali and Miransha, they had terror cells in Pakistan, in all the cities, in Quetta, in Karachi, in Lahore, in Islamabad. And this is how they make money. They'll kidnap someone, you've never even heard of them, 10 lakh, million rupees. Kidnap someone for a crore. Kidnap someone for 2 crores. Kidnap someone for 20 lakhs. Kidnap someone for this. Shias, they'll target Shia community. They'll MD community. They'll target minorities because they're quick to pay. They're Sunni militants. And what happens is you start the conversation being a kafir. So if you don't pay quickly, you're already on, and they've set precedent of beheading. They don't, so this is how the groups fund and run. And Pakistan is a country of 220 million people. You can extort a lot of people. So I was actually their first very high level target. No one had ever wandered off into territory like this. But
Hmm.
just before me, they had kidnapped an American diplomat called Warren Weinstein. And then shortly after me, they kidnapped the former prime minister's son as well. So they were, as far as they were concerned, they were executing their plans pretty well. And I was kidnapped on the 26th of August, and on the 28th of August, I was in Mir Ali.
You were
So
in Mir Ali, and then
Mir Ali.
by that time, had they briefed you about their demands and money, or were they
So
in touch with
no,
your family?
no, they didn't do anything like that. So they kept me, I think, for a month without any information, and they never got in touch with my family either. And then after a month, very in a Hollywood manner, they got in touch with my family, and what they did was they set up a huge La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah black banner, and they had like nine guys masked up in vests and guns and everything, and had little old me in a Guantanamo Bay kind of orange outfit and handcuffed, and guys had guns on my head, and it was the first time after almost a month or 2 months being with them that it was the first time I heard their demand, and their demand was something like $65 million and 25 militants. And I just remember thinking, I'm dead. I'm going to die. And yeah, so it was.
You are saying $65 million and
Yeah.
20 terrorists in exchange.
So they actually wanted it in rupees, and when they asked, it was 4 billion rupees, and at the time the dollar was at 86 or 85. But when it hit 92, they called my mother up and they said, "Listen, we asked in PKR, but we hedged it with the dollar, so you have to adjust."
There's a Shabazz.
So,
I mean, I'm honestly appreciated the way you have taken the whole thing, and during various interviews, I've seen you talking about it. It's a phase of catharsis for you, and at the same time, one could see a lot of black humor, so much satire, a bit
yeah,
of a bit of comedy, and a bit of Shakespeare, and a bit of Greek tragedy in your book. And at the end of the day, obviously, it was a horror for you to remain in that captivity for 5 years. But then the way you have taken it, the way you have described all that ordeal in various bits and phases. So let me come to this, the black humor, because you just talked about it. There was this Korean guy. I know so many things, and I have heard you also speaking on this because I had attended a session here in London
yes,
during the Pakistan Literature Festival. Amina Sayyed had organized a beautiful festival, and there you spoke, and there were hundreds of people listening to you, watching you. And I got goosebumps when you were talking about some of those stories, the torture that you had to bear and face. So I'm coming back to this Korean guy. Just please put him in perspective and let the people see that how bizarre this story is in certain segments. And also you are saying that they had this kalma, saying that in the name of Allah, la ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, that thing, and they are demanding a ransom.
yeah.
Ransom. I mean, it's not a religious issue. You hadn't done anything against your religion. You were a follower of the religion, and yet they are demanding the ransom. They are calling it a kind of a religious act. What a shame. Anyway, so this Korean guy, who was this man?
So incredible, right? Just touching on the humor part, it's such a difficult story to tell people, and I always find that my audience, whenever I'm speaking, and I've been very lucky to get an opportunity to speak at various events, they kind of get like, how is this person sitting in front of us if the person that he's talking about is himself. So I have to bring in some comedy and make them laugh, and make them see that I look at this. tragedy as an experience. I because I'm alive, and it was a very difficult time in my life. It was not a tragic time in my life. It made me a much better person. It made me wiser. It made me understand things about the world and understand things about myself, qualities in myself that I didn't even know existed, that I hope I never have to touch again, on again. But but I grew from this experience. And whenever you grow from an experience, no matter how difficult it is, it's not tragic. So I never associate tragedy with my kidnapping, or actually even with my father's death, because what he did for himself was leave a legacy, not for me. But the thing about legacies is that they're endless, they're timeless. 100 years from now, somebody could be inspired by his story, and and do amazing things. And so there's no tragedy, with it's I lost my father and I mourn him every day, but he died for something so much bigger than me. And I know what happened to me was very difficult and very violent as well, but you know I came out of it with a smile. Really, I did, because I got a second chance at life. And the comedy part is, this entire thing is comical if you think about it. When they asked for the 4 billion rupees, it was $65 million. People say I'm the highest ransom in Pakistan. I'm actually the highest ransom ever. There's no ransom like this ever been asked. Now just imagine. Now it's not been asked of Bill Gates' son. It's not been asked of Elon Musk's son. You literally just asked somebody who's never seen that. I mean, where are you going to get $65 million from? But they were convinced, and that's what I found very humorous. That no matter, and their conviction gave me a lot of sabr, because I was like, they really believe they're going to get this money. And to a point where I once joked with them, and I was like, if you do manage to get this kind of money, you should give me some as well. I mean, you should. I'm the reason you're getting it. But it was crazy. Like, the delusion was nothing short of comedy. And even the events, like, there's I'll tell you about the Korean, because it was my mother, when I came back, the first thing she asked me was, where the hell was this man from?
The Korean guy.
The Korean. Now, in their head, they're very primitive in terms of, in our societies, we have elite, we have upper class, middle class, lower middle class, and we have poverty. We have these things structured, and we understand when we see someone wo kis kidhar hai. It's just how our society works. But when you see these people, they're not part of anything that our society has ever shown us. They are primitive. They are primitive human beings. They're literally from a very, very God knows what time, and they're also barbaric. It's because they've not lived in a society, or at least not chose to be part of one. So they're very barbaric as well. It's like literally being with cavemen and thinking this is some kind of a movie. You can't live like this and eat like this and speak like this and think like this. So the Korean was an engineer. He was studying electrical engineering, which is also not an easy thing to study in Korea. And some Jamaat Islami boys were studying there in some hostel, and they usko Musliman bana diya. So they brought the brother into faith, but the faith wasn't enough for the brother, because Palestine and all of these just he couldn't take it. So he got on a plane and he got to Pakistan and he went and joined the IMU. And when he joined the IMU, he was like, I think that I'm a little above my head. So I'm definitely not a big fighter. So he joined the media department, where he would do editing and videos and
Okay.
spoke English. Now, Koreans speak in an American accent, but Uzbeks speak in a Russian accent. Uzbeks are under Russian sphere of influence. So you can't, very rarely will you come across an Uzbek who speaks in an American accent. It means that his family and have been disassociated with the country for God knows how many decades. And this is, I'm talking about before World War II, because since then, this is a Russian sphere of influence. To so much to a point where they're called like Islam Naragadov, or the names are of Russian heritage now. They're Central Asian people. They have nothing to do with Russia. They just live under that sphere. So, anyways, Now, this guy speaks with an American Korean cowboy accent, and he's the only one in all of Waziristan who speaks like this. And the ISI, I'm talking about like high level intelligence, could not understand. Ye kya namuna hai? And he'd be like, "Ma'am, I'm going to tell you where to pick the body up from." I'm just sitting over there, like, like it's funny, like, Bugs Bunny is going to be delivering my body, and it's just hilarious the way that. Um, but I had a big laugh with my mother about it, and I was like, he was a little guy as well, and very like he wasn't like as scary as he sounded on the phone, like in real life. Of course, he was because he had a Kalashnikov. But funnier, like and even in my book, sometimes it gets so dark that I have to tell you a funny story, or I have to tell you something to. Also, sorry, there's a horrible bug in Lahore. But I have to tell you something to also get you to keep going, because it's a dark story with moments of light. There's another very funny story about my kidnapper and me, where he tells me about. So basically, he comes into my room at night, and there's no electricity, and it's a mud prison. So there's no light, and he walks in, and they wear lights over here. So he walks in, and he's a very tall and scary looking, very over imposing, gloomy sort of dark character. That's just how he was, anyways, and menacing and very thin as well. So he sits on this slight upper thing in the room, and he's looking down at me. And I thought, it's another conversation of abusing my mother and abusing my father and telling me I'm an infidel and I'll be murdered and the angels will, burn my soul in hell, and another one of these. And these used to happen like almost every night. He would come in and like start about my father, then start about my mother, then start about me, mentally torturing me, abusing my family, telling me why I deserve for all of this to happen to me. So he comes and he's like, they used to call me Ahmed. So he said, Ahmed, where are the most beautiful women in the world? So I just looked at him and I said, this is a trick question before he cuts your head off. So just say no. I said, listen, I don't even like women. I don't know what you're talking about. He said, no, stop it. Yeah, tell me. Just where are they? You've traveled so much. Tell me something. So I said, Brazil. I just really went to one end of the earth. I said, Brazil. He said, no, that's too far. So tell me somewhere. So I said, Iran. So he said, no, they're kafirs and we're going to conquer them anyways. So we're not interested. Tell me something. What is it? So now I actually started to think, because I said two things quickly and they were instantly rejected. So I thought of Italy, and I've spent so much time there. It's such a beautiful country and a beautiful people. And I hope that the entire country forgives me for this. But anyways, I said I love Italy, and I think Italian women are beautiful. And then I was about to say something else, and he goes, "Yes!" Now he starts talking to himself. Okay, he goes, "Yes, Italian women." And when I conquered, now he's conquering Rome. So he's, like if I want to do something, I picture it, I plan it, I write it, right? But he's like, when I conquer Rome, so I know what he's picturing in his head is a war where he's now defeating the Roman army, but which hasn't existed for God knows how long. But anyway, so he's now conquered Rome, and he's like, I will make the Vatican my harem. So I just thought, this man, and I've been to the Vatican, and I was maybe 12 or 13, and I had a very profound experience where I saw something that mesmerized. I asked my father, how is this possible? And he said, and we spoke about it for hours, and I was just completely taken by the Vatican. The Sistine Chapel
The Sistine Chapel, of course. You just keep watching it and yes,
you just
mesmerized.
you're mesmerized. This is an unbelievable human accomplishment. It's like watching the pyramids, or one of these unbelievable human accomplishments. Anyways, many years later, we were being bombed out of Pakistan. It was ferocious, and it took 7 days. It was quite grueling. We were being targeted by the Pakistani military on one side, by NATO and the US on the other side. We had to leave Pakistan and get into Afghanistan. So we're going from one hell into another. And when we finally did make it to Afghanistan, all these guys fell in sajda and thanking God. And the Taliban guide looked at them, and he's like, a dog doesn't even sleep under the open sky over here. I don't know what you're thanking and praying God. I don't know what you're so happy about, but you're all about to die. So, anyways, in those moments, my kidnapper was sitting right next to me. So I looked at him and I was like, I went like this and I was like, Rome is the other way. Like I started laughing. And he just looked at me and he had this hatred in his eyes and it was like the years of pain and torture that he's inflicted on me. I almost felt like the scale had kind of balanced. He was so demoralized and his hopes and his dreams of conquering Rome, and now we were going into little Afghanistan. So but I do that. Like I try and make people laugh. I try to show them how primitive really these people are.
And this is and you are saying all these things um, against the backdrop that you were tortured, and you were tortured seriously. They did something to your nails, and then I think you said at that festival that the most painful thing for you was the loneliness. Please talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, the humor is something that's part of my story, but the torture is also very much part of it. That was a very difficult time. It was a time where I hadn't laughed. Actually, what they did to me led up to the humor. Um, they tortured me and kept me in isolation for so long, and they were so brutal and they degraded me as a human being. I was telling you that this was a funny conversation about Rome, but every night he would come and he would tell me that your mother doesn't love you, that she's got a lover, that your wife has a lover, that your sister has your brother is this. Just every day they're spending their money. And this, as a matter of fact, I remember 3 years into my kidnapping, once he came and he's like, he was in a rage, so he came in abusing me and saying, your brother's probably spent all your money and you're sitting here rotting. And I was like, यार 3 साल पहले ये बात करनी थी, 3 साल मुझे कुत्ते की तरह रख के तुझे याद आया कि मेरे भाई ने मेरे पैसे खर्चे हैं. So so but I'd grown in where I was to a point where I could, instead of being a very broken human being, I could stand up for myself and talk to them. But that was a 4.5 year long journey. In the beginning, it was isolation, it was torture, it was beatings, it was, nails. They pulled all of my nails out. They pulled even from my feet. They pulled the nails out of my feet. They used to take knives and blades and they used to cut my back in straight lines and then across every day, and they used to throw salt on it. And all of this was videotaped from my mother, and she had to watch every section. She couldn't forward it. There were no pictures. They were detailed, disgusting videos. They would lash me every single day. And the thing about getting beat, wo usko dara ke, they call it a dara. It's a whip that's made out of cow hide, and it's like leather, and it's very basic in terms of how they stitch it and make it. But when it hits you, your muscle bursts. Like it just explodes, and the swellings and I was maybe 90 pounds. I'm about 155 pounds right now. And I'm 5'8", 5'9", so I'm a decent height, very decent weight. But 90 pounds, 85 pounds is like literally my bones were sticking, and I had no muscle. I was just bones. And they would bury me in the ground for 12 hours. As a matter of fact, I was just, I was playing online yesterday, video game, and I started singing this jihadi nashida. My brother looked at me, he's like, do you know what the hell you're saying? And I was like, Jundullah, Jundullah. And I was just playing, and I was zoned in, and my brother's just looking at me, he's like, what the hell are you singing? And I was like, yeah, मुझे जब torture करते थे, they put a bucket on my head and put these nashidas on, so I had to like try and connect with the nashidas so I don't go crazy. But yeah, they would carry out these horrific exercises to torture me. And then one day, of all the funny things that they wanted to do, they came and they started cutting flesh out of my back. And that was probably the worst that they did. I got shot. They shot me as well, but that was actually an accident. They did that by accident. but they shot me. So, but he had a pistol. It was automatic. He came into my room. He was again screaming at me, "Your mother's not doing this," and the gun went off, and he shot me clean through my leg. And I have a, the wound. It's a big part of. It's the best scar that I show people. I keep it for last. This is my bullet wound as well. But I find humor in all of this now because I had to fight it. I had to fight myself, my brain. And you mentioned the loneliness.
Solitary confinement, yeah?
Yeah. And the reason that I talk about the torture and I laugh about it is because I can explain it to you in human terms. If my nail is being removed, yes, that is very painful. But if you're playing football and you kick the ball wrong and you break your nail and you have to go to the hospital, they'll remove it in the exact same manner. It's just a quick pull and it pulls it out. And yes, there's pain, but it is what it is. We've broken bones, we've cut glass, sar phata hua hai, everything. Car accident. You can understand pain. Pain is it's something that anyone can explain to you. Yes, when someone inflicts it on you, it's abuse. Your personal space is violated. It's dehumanizing. But again, for me, the worst wasn't the torture. For me, the worst was that they were making my mother watch the torture. They were torturing her and they were torturing me. And I'm a father now. And my son was unwell. I had to take him to the hospital. उस बेचारे को टीका लगता है, वो चीख मारता है, मेरी जान निकल जाती है. And every time I get worried about my child, I call my mother and I tell her how much I love her because I can't even imagine what I've done to her. And that's me. That's on me. People tell me it's not your fault. They did this, they did that. But the pain that my mother lived through, the trauma that she suffered as a mother, is nothing to what happened to me. Because like I said, I have a sense of triumph. That doesn't mean everyone has a sense of triumph. The people that saw this happen to me don't have a sense of triumph over it. They don't even find it that funny when I talk about it in a funny manner. It's a very dark period for them, a very haunting period for them. But the loneliness is something there's no words. It is the darkest state that a human being can be left in. We are, as creation, not meant to be alone. That's why we're made in pairs. Whether you study religious text or you study scientific text, if a human being is so isolated that he doesn't have one person, it's just you can you can tell them apart. You can see that this person is suffering from loneliness. He's a complete, nobody speaks to him. You can see this, and it's always odd. For other people, it's always odd. Why doesn't he come out? Why is he alone? Or why is it? But even when we say that, we're not very social or whatever, we have a clan of 10 people that we still have. That koi masla hoye, we call our brother, koi masla hoye, we call this person. There's always this human connection is impossible to rid yourself of. And this is how we are. We need intimacy, we need love, we need criticism, we need anger, we need, all these different emotions with different people. We need arguments, we need agreements, we need to be, patronized, we need to be told we're right, we need to be told we're wrong. It's just how we are as a creation. But to have nothing, no voice, no conversation, to be left completely alone with yourself. And you are the worst person to be. I realized that I had to really do a lot to remind myself that you are your company and you've got good company, and the reason for the humor comes from there, because I used to do stand-up comedy. I used to start singing. I used to recite my one of the funniest things that my father taught me was Bahadur Shah Zafar's poetry, and he used to say kitna badnaseeb hai Zafar dafan ke liye do gaz zameen na mili koye yaar mein. And I used to think, how can something like this ever apply to a king buried in a jail, and how many nights I spent thinking कि बहादुर शाह की बदकिस्मती सिर्फ उसकी नहीं थी. वो कहते हैं कि जो शेर होता है वो it becomes like a phrase. It can apply to anyone, and how funny that मैंने आज तक किसी आदमी को नहीं मिला और मुझे तो 2 गज ज़मीन मेरे वतन में भी नहीं. मैं तो पता नहीं कहाँ दफन होऊंगा, किस ब्लास्ट के नीचे दफन होऊंगा. कोई फिदाई हमला होएगा, कोई जेट की स्ट्राइक होगी, कोई इन बेवकूफ़ों में से होएगा, कोई गलत गोश्त का कहीं गलत जगह से काट देंगे तो ऐसे खून निकलेगा कि मतलब They didn't even mean it, or मैं मर गया. So, anyways, I used to entertain myself with this irony and with all the things. But in the beginning, when I used to think about my mother's voice, it became this overwhelming burden that I can never explain to you. The memory of my life before my kidnapping made me suicidal. It drove me over the edge because I could not believe how could I have had so much and how do I have nothing? I don't even have a pot. I don't even have a loo anymore. I use a bucket. You really go from, I'm not saying I'm at the top, but I live a great life, a very fulfilled and happy life. मुझे अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह इतना वो नहीं है, किसी चीज़ की ज़रूरत नहीं है. I have everything. And so I can never explain to you what that feeling of helplessness and
2-3 चीज़ें इसमें निकल के आती हैं। एक तो देखिए आप कहाँ आसमान पे थे, अचानक ज़मीन पे आ गए हैं। दोनों ज़िंदगियाँ बिल्कुल अलग हैं। बहुत अच्छी तरह से खूबसूरत तरीके से आपने उसको बयान किया कि एक वक़्त था जब आपके पास सब कुछ था, लैविशली सारी चीज़ें, सो एंटाइटल्ड, सो प्रिविलेज्ड, और दूसरी तरफ कुछ भी नहीं है, जो बेसिक चीज़ें हो सकती हैं वो भी नहीं है। एक बात और जो मैं जानना चाहता हूँ आपसे, आई रियली वांट टू अंडरस्टैंड फ्रॉम यू दिस is about dying, the thought of the very thought of dying in futility, like for example a soldier gets killed in an encounter, or someone doing something, or maybe if someone is lynched in front of a crowd, and people later remember this person as a kind of a martyr. So there's a purpose uh, for a certain death, and probably there's no purpose for certain death.
I spent a lot of time thinking what a purposeless life I've lived, and what a you know s- everybody will remember me as very bachara, you know, bachara. Yeah, Shahbaz was a nice guy, got kidnapped and beheaded on camera. It's just not something. I'm not saying that I was born to do something incredible, but I was born and I do deserve to live my life on my own terms. Um, and it's a very haunting feeling to come to terms with death, especially for a 26, 27 year old. um, and it's not coming from a place of it. Literally, I can't tell you, like, I remember the first time I heard a jet strike explain the fear of jets. But after 20 strikes, I was also relatively, like, not as quick running, and it was okay, like routine mein, you know.
Hmm.
And that is kind of, when you see death, I'll tell you something. Forget all the outside events that could kill me. वो तो चलो. With my kidnappers, when they shot me, that was one of the last things, and removing of the flesh. These two, three things were some of the last things that they did to me. But what they did actually by doing all this was empower me. I came to a point with them where I was like, I now just every human nerve ending of mine had been torn apart. So pain was, I felt it. Now you have to give me death, or you will give me respect, some form of it. And that was a very difficult situation for my kidnappers. They accidentally, but they countered it, but they countered it in the worldly sense. So when he told me that I can't kill you because your mother has four of my guys, I started laughing, and I was like, after all this time, the worst mistake you made was tell me that you can't kill me, because I don't care about you. I'm not even scared of you anymore. And he looked at me and he smiled. Me and him were big, back in throws. And he looked at me, and for all the arguments that I won against him, he won as many against me. And his were more demoralizing victories because it was always personal. And when I told him that, the worst mistake you ever made was tell me you can't kill me. And he looked at me and he's like, I never wanted to kill you. And he just looked around. He's like, all of this will kill you. I never wanted to kill you. I want money. Pay me and go home. And he got up and left.
Shabazz, there are some women as well here in your book, and there are some characters, and they are obviously real characters. इससे true story. It's a true book. It's about your experience in captivity and the torture that you had to face, uh, and then you talk about some women who were very different from these men.
So that's the difficult thing. I'll try and explain it to you a little. So my kidnapper's mother-in-law actually stopped my torture. My kidnapper's mother-in-law was Muhammad Tahir Farooq's wife.
Okay.
She raised her children to be just like my kidnappers and was very proud of the IMU and what all of her husband's accomplishments were. She was the first name on the group's suicide list. The
Hmm.
first name. It was a symbolic gesture for other suicide bombers. कि अगर खत्म हो गए तो फिर हमें आए मतलब इनको भेजना होगा तो कभी खत्म नहीं होते थे. She believed in everything that they believed in. This was her foundation. She never thought that anything that her son-in-law or her husband or her son or her daughters or their grandchildren or anyone in the group that they ever did anything that was wrong, that they were on haq, that they were mujahideen, and that everything that they did was right. Kill people, murder them, however they did it, 100% on board. That's why you have to understand the miracle in this moment saving my life. Because if she saw me on a Sunday afternoon on the street light and she was on her, regular blow up mission, she would not hesitate for a second. She'd take my life, she'd take my kids' life, she'd take my wife's life. She wouldn't care about women, children, men. As a matter of fact, she teaches women and children how many women and children they've had to bury. Right? So to remove that element from there, वो कदर हो हर बंदे को होता है और औरत they these people remove that element from you, that mercy, they remove it from you, and it's through practice and training. I can't just tell you stop caring about women and children. I have to train you to stop caring about women and children, so that when you go and carry out these attacks, they're indiscriminate. You go into a mosque, you don't hesitate. You go into a school, you don't hesitate. You shoot children in the head, no mercy. You go to women's markets and blow them up by the thousands. There's no mercy. And this is taught to you. Just like we are taught not to do all this. It's a lifelong of education. And Aya, I call her Aya, was of that world. But when they were removing the flesh from my back, I was screaming and I was in so much pain, and I'd been living in a house for 6, 7 months. I don't know how this woman broke barriers. She actually broke barriers to get to me because they live behind a parda system, and it's not an Afghan parda system or a Pathan parda system or a Lahori parda system. It's none. It is the highest form of Shariai parda system that you can find in any text. It's not even the voice of the woman will be heard by a man, let alone her tearing down the barriers that restrict her, coming in and screaming at men, saying, I'll tear the whole house down if you don't let this
Hmm.
guy. And she saved my life because they removed 3 pieces of flesh or 4 pieces they removed, but they wanted to do it on the other side as well. So it wasn't going to end. And I was standing in Pakistan. We have these bowls that these plastic things that we wash clothes in, and they're fairly large. And so I was actually standing in one of those, and it was filled with my blood. And my color had become like it took me 3, 4 months to recover from this, and they couldn't stitch me. They were open wounds. वो मतलब I cannot explain to you what they did to me. It was like you don't even do that to animals. You just, their death is more merciful. And in all of this chaos, this woman found me and saved my life. Literally, she saved.
How did she save you?
She came in basically. Now she was also the prime minister's wife. The prime minister may be shaheed, but she's got that standing. And this was her son-in-law. So she tore through these barriers. She said, "Leave him alone. Get the hell out of my house. No one is going to do. What have you opened over here?" And the main thing that she emphasized was that he is a guest in my house. He is my guest, and that's it. Get out. So she threw the three guards who were helping, cut me. The son-in-law had to stay, but he was furious. He was in a state of rage. Like, how dare you come in and interrupt all this? She was, my daughter will leave you. Get out of the house. These are not conversations that you have with men over there. She broke every kind of ceiling that was set by her. She smashed and she saved my life, and she made her own son take me and matlab jaise bhi heal karna hai, just food. I mean, I had access to taking a shower once a week. I got toothpaste, toothbrush, shampoo, but she'd given me all this very early on when I came into her house. And then I was teaching her children. I used to spend time with her kids, not her children, her grandchildren, her children's children, and her son. And I taught him Urdu, and we stories. I used to paint with them. There's some very tragic stories as well in me teaching them, and some of the things that I learned. Horrible, like a 3-year-old girl. Just her name was Fatima, and basically Fatima was Aya's granddaughter, Muhammad Ali's wife's daughter from her first husband. So women over here, unfortunately, also marry 3-4 times because the men have a very short lifespan. So, anyways, Fatima was 3 years old. Now you have to understand, I have children, so I can see a brilliant child. Fatima was a brilliant child. She could speak at maybe, very well. She could speak very well by 1.5, like proper. Now I have children as well, and I know by that age they are speaking, but not as well as she was. And they definitely couldn't read, and they definitely couldn't learn another language as quick. And it's not coming from their parents, it's literally coming from someone who can't even read and write. So this brilliant child and I are sitting, and I'm making a coloring drawing for her. I was drawing a truck, and वो अपनी तरफ कुछ और बना रही थी. You have to be very careful with what you paint. You can't draw animals and humans because that's in kid dunya mein it's considered haram. It's always cars and a fruit or something like that. So anyways, I drew this truck and I was painting it pink, and I was making a flower on the door. And that's when she looked and she's like, what? And now I have a daughter as well. I've seen anger, I've seen her be, वो क्या कहते हैं, ziddi, sad, cry, everything. I've seen all the emotions that children can express, but I've never seen rage. I've never seen rage in a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. It's just not something they even know about. And she was in a rage. She was shaking, and she's like, what have you done to my dachshund? And dachshund is what they call these Hiluxes. And I had to carry out my Fidai Hamla in it, as in my suicide attack was in this car. And who's going to take me seriously with your flower? And I just remembered looking at this child and feeling devastated. Like, what have we done as human beings, that there is a 3-year-old child. I don't care who her father is and who her mother is. But this is what I wanted to be, a doctor or an astronaut. She wants to be a suicide bomber at 3. But this indoctrination came from Ayajan. Her father was always out. Her father was dead when she was a child. The second one was a stepfather. He couldn't care less. And they live in these devastating circumstances. But anyways, this family, my kidnapper, my torturer, my abductor's family is the one that saved my life. It's almost from God. Like it's a miracle. I haven't even spoken about his brother-in-law, Abdul Aziz, Aya's son, Muhammad Tahir Farooq's son, in this book that much. But he also, like, as far as the story is concerned, he was. I always, when I used to speak to him and look at him, I always felt like this man has been born in the wrong. He wasn't a fighter. He was a medic. And he was weak because he'd been shot as a 13-year-old by a helicopter. So he was very weak and frail and just nothing aggressive. No aggressive, and no anger, no nothing, no resentment at the wound that he had, the life that he'd lived. Lost his father, lost so many people that he knew. Nothing, just fine. And he even asked me once, he's like, if I was ever in Lahore, do you think your friends would accept me or something? And I thought about it because the answer is no. But I was like, I think my friends would be very grateful because you saved my life. And he did. He saved my life multiple times. Aya did it that one incident, but he also saved my life.
Saved your life multiple times, but then at the end of the day, you were not freed. You were not released from their prison. You were still, their prisoner, and they were hoping, yeah, they were hoping that one day they would get the ransom. Mm.
Yeah. And by the way, my kidnapper, till the day he died, that delusion never left him. He kept me there for 4 years under the delusion or the illusion or whatever you want to say, that I will get my ransom.
Okay. And so, Shabazz, just let me come back to the end of this story. I mean, your book is about so many things, but then this part where one day you are free. I mean, that's absolutely, non-climatic in a way that there's a kind of a crescendo, and then there's so much lull, and there's no kind of a grand finale. But obviously, for your family, it's a huge finale. It's a grand finale. The sun is back.
I always laugh and say, if they ever made a movie, so instead of like the escape is fun, but yeah, it is a bit like anticlimactic. So I was like, maybe, I can put on like an Iron Man suit and you can continue into the Avengers, something cool like, because it's as crazy as it sounds. I cannot tell you how intense the experience was till the doors to my freedom opened. And I was like, really? this is this is it? And it was so I did not even believe it. Really, I'll take you through a little briefly. So basically, the Uzbeks and the Taliban went to war. So how I was telling you about how they were so close and the importance of these people to the Taliban is actually the end of the story, which is how they fell apart. It's like two brothers falling apart and going to war with each other. And I always think of Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh for some reason when I think of the Uzbeks and the Afghan Taliban, because the Uzbeks actually used to think of themselves as invaders as well. They used to have a sense of ownership. It was crazy. So I've never heard I mean, I knew that Babur was Uzbek, and I understand all this, but I never understood the kind of like the. So they think, this group, is that we were the original conquerors. We are the Mughals. But the Mughals were not Indians. They were Uzbeks. You are Indians. We invaded you. We turned you into Muslims. You were Indians, Hindus, Buddhists. We made you worship Allah. And I just thought, I know he had his angle, but no one had quite put it like that before this man. So, these great conquerors, and then they like this with the Taliban, and they had a fight because the Uzbeks went with ISIS. They believed that ISIS is the caliphate. So the Afghan Taliban butchered them. In that butchery, a road was opened, and it led to my eventual freedom. But the man who helped me escape from the prison that I was in, I offered him a ransom, and I told him, just don't go stupid like $65 million. But if you ask for something reasonable, I'm sure you'll get it. And if you have one or two brothers stuck in some hellhole, I'm sure that if they can find them, they'll get you that. But get me out of it. So he looks at me, and this is the funniest part about my story, because he looks at me and he goes, "We don't believe in kidnapping and ransom. The Afghan Taliban don't believe in kidnapping and ransom." I said, "And what about your subsidiaries? This is like ridiculous. how can you not believe in kidnappings and ransoms? You've taken 4 years of my life, and all of your subsidiaries, all of these Uzbeks and Al Qaeda's and all these guys, have you read the news?" Anyway, so he said, "Look, you're gonna leave this prison. You're gonna walk down a certain road, and there's nothing here. You're in the middle of nowhere. So the first houses that you see, you have to go to them, and they're going to Quetta. They'll take you." And he told me, don't converse with these people, because I had made up a story how I'm a fighter from England and I've come here to do jihad, and I made up this whole. His name was Yusuf Britannia. So he said, no more. Like, definitely don't say you speak Urdu or anything, because you have to go to Balochistan as well. So just be quiet. But I had made up quite an elaborate story of who I was. Anyways, it took me 7 days from that prison to reach a town outside of Quetta. And when I reached that town, till the moment I reached that town, those 7 days, every second of those 7 days, I believed that there would be a trade, that they would exchange me for some ransom and they'd take me to a safe house in Pakistan or wherever. And 3-4 महीने में अब ये मसला खत्म हो जाएगा. and they'd come to a peaceful resolution, and I won't be tortured or kept in some ridiculous, inhumane conditions, because these seem like human beings. That's how much I'd been through. That a man telling me that they're going to take you home did not make sense. And literally on the 7th of May, 7th of May? I can't even remember. Sorry, 7th of March is when I came home. On the 7th of March after Fajr, I woke up and I was getting ready to get on the bike with these guys. And one of them looked at me and he said, "Where's your Mahajir card?" I said, "What? What are you talking about?" So he said, he's, because I don't speak any language, so he's communicating in sign language. And he's like, "Mahajir card, sta, Mahajir card, immigrant, immigration, immigration." I said, "Passport?" Because I didn't know what he's saying. So I was like, "You want, I don't have a passport." He's like, "Card, ID." वो Mahajir card को भी वो कुछ कह रहा था. Card, whatever his word was. So I said, no, I don't have any ID. Are you crazy? So, he was like, "This is the Taliban." So he went to the other Taliban and they had like a little, like a little discussion. And then he came back to me and he's like, "Yusuf, we can't take you because they'll arrest us on the check post. You don't have a card, man. How are you going to go home?" So I was like, "Don't worry. You guys go. I'll find my way." So they left me and they left. They drove off. And I walked and walked and walked and finally found some like a motorcycle with like a rickshaw accommodation, and I offered him 5,000 rupees and said, "Take me to Quetta." So he said, "Get on, 5,000 rupees, no problem, get on." The guy who let me go gave me 15,000 rupees as well. So by the way, I was kidnapped for 65 million, but I came back with 15. This is why the business part of my description is very important to me. The author thing is there, but the business one is very...
Absolutely, businessman. Yeah.
He stops outside this town. Now, this is the first time I've seen civilization in 4.5 years. And it's a place called Kuchlak. I've never heard of it in my life. And he says, "I can't, do you have your Mahajir card?" So I literally started laughing. I was like, "I don't have a Mahajir card, and don't worry, just take me." My plan was I'll get off at the checkpost and be like, "I'm home. I'm home." So anyways, now he started freaking out. He's like, "Yeah, you're a Taliban." Like he's speaking to me in Urdu-ish, Pashto, and saying, "Hey, you're a Taliban and you'll get into a lot of trouble. What are you doing?" So the first thing that I asked for was a payphone. And he turned around again. He was shocked. And he's like, "Payphones have been obsolete for 2-3 years. Where have you been? Well, who are you?" So then I got a phone. I called my mother, and I just said, "Listen, you're not going to believe this." My mother had no contact with me for almost a year. So I was presumed dead as well. Of course, my family refused to accept it, but I was presumed dead. There was no search, there was no negotiation, there was nothing. For 1 year, almost 8 months or something, they literally thought my mother is a mad woman because she was saying establish contact. They were like, "Your son's dead." Every time she'd say establish contact, they said there is no contact. We've not heard from the middleman in months. I think he's dead. You need to come to terms with it. So, randomly I call her from a bazaar in Kuchlak. And and then, here I am.
Brilliant. And so far, just share some interesting stories about your book, because I know that the book has been very well received. You have been giving lots of interviews. You appeared on various BBC shows and then other.
Me and the BBC are like, while I was kidnapped, I used to listen to the BBC. So all the anchors like Razia Iqbal, Lee James, there's so many more, Saima Mohsen, BBC Urdu journalist, BBC English journalist, Voice of America Urdu journalist,
And Zainab Badawi.
yeah, Zainab. It's horrible of me because I've forgotten the man's name who does Hard Talk as well. But I used to listen to all.
Stephen Secker.
Stephen Sacker. So I followed these guys for 3 or 4 years, and you have to understand the radio is a very different medium. I don't know what kind of love journalists get on television when people are watching them, but I've seen people watching the news, and it's very like they get the information, they don't get, and they switch the thing, they switch. बड़े कम होते हैं, they start connect. But I was like connected with them in a way that I came back and I wrote them all letters. I emailed all of them and said, "You don't understand. You were my window. I lived in darkness till you brought in the light into my life." Um, I followed Man United. You know, Lee James works for BBC, and he used to go over the games, and I used to listen to the live commentaries. And sorry, you know, I'm an older generation. I'm 39. You know, my Walkman, my kids and all don't even know what a cassette or a VHS or any of this stuff. And it's crazy because I used to make the same jokes with my father when he used to talk about black and white TV, and we'd be like, "What are you talking about?" And radio. You know, radio is not a form of a medium for my generation. It's a medium for the generation before me. And to have it as the only thing that I had for so long, I have such a deep connection with it. I go on the shows, and it's such a pleasure to be able to talk and tell people my story. And
This is what yeah, okay, this is what I want to understand, that talking about your ordeal and also writing this book and appearing on talk shows, discussing various things, various facets of terrorism, Pakistan, political situation, all those things. How has it helped you in terms of, you know, trying to understand that it's a different life for you now and that chapter is over? How much has it helped you?
um, I have to be honest with you, writing this book was a healing exercise, not just for me, but for my family as well. And you know, like you come face to face with a lot of demons that maybe even you're trying to brush under the carpet, and you have to go over these things very extensively. And like I said, no matter what the experience is, if it's an experience, no matter how difficult, you grow. And even with the interviews and with all the talks that I'm doing, I remember the first one that I did, I was a nervous wreck, sweating, and I'm a very nervous person. I'm not an open person. I'm not trained for this. I have no training in this. It's all off cuff. And, you know, that sometimes I say more than I should, or, you know, the wrong thing. But it's the most amazing gift that my experience and my life has given me. Is the opportunity to be able to sit with people and talk to them about this very difficult situation, and also make it enjoyable for them. They hear about it and they enjoy the conversation. I don't know. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but like we're having a nice conversation, and you know we've been talking for a while, and time just sometimes I'm trying to sum up too much in too little time, but I make these amazing connections with people, and they connect, and we talk about it, and you can see there's maybe I the only time you'll feel sadness in me is when I speak about my father, or when I speak about the pain that my mother's had to endure, because those are people that I love, and that's not my own pain. That, I mean, it is my pain, it affects me, but it's pain that's caused to other people that you know I love a lot. And the fact that my mother had to watch these videos after the way that my father was taken from her. You know, he's my dad, but he was her partner. You know, the person that she chose to spend the rest of her life with, and now she doesn't have that, and it's a part of her life that she doesn't have. And as a married man with children, I could not imagine a life without my partner, and it's a very difficult thing to do for someone to go through. But it's the only time you feel sadness, because it's a wound. Like I said, it can't heal. But my own experience is, you know, I make it try to make it interesting. And the thing about the interviews is part of promoting the book, and I want to get this to as many people. You know, I want people to read it, not for my experience in particular, but my family's story as well. Because I always tell people, a lot of people say this to me in the West, that you know your father was buried, but his killer was celebrated in a sea of people. And I always say to them, a sea of people or 100,000 people. A sea of people would be a million people. That's a sea, and that's 5% of Pakistan's population. A sea of people mourned my father and mourned his the in the manner in which we lost him. A sea of people was silent about it because a few people were armed, dangerous, and in the streets. And people in general in societies are not armed and dangerous. And so they mourned him in silence. And sometimes they say that the silence is haunting. It's too loud, in Pakistan. And we allowed that narrative for the West to have this narrative that Mumtaz Qadri is celebrated in Pakistan. He's not. He got barely 100,000 people come out. You kill the governor of Punjab on blasphemy in a Muslim country, and you can't get more than 100,000 people. I mean, it's not a sea. So there's trauma associated with that, but I want people to read my family story and my father's story, and that chapter about the day that he died and what he died for and what he stood for and why I have a sense of triumph over my experience, because it's related to his death. I
That's
was
right.
kidnapped for being his son, and you couldn't kidnap me for a better reason.
Whatever we have discussed is in your book, and in fact is much more fascinating, much more interesting, and much more anecdotal as well. uh, just Shabazz, I wonder if I'm going to make a kind of a request to you. Recite some of your favorite poetry, or maybe the poetry that you heard from your father. वो क्या सुनाते थे जब उनका दिल करता था खास तौर पे आपको, या आप उनसे सुनना चाहते थे?
I'll tell you a poem. I'll tell you Dada's poem. I felt like this poem was written for Abba. It's just a small part of it. भूलो ना तासीर की बातें, कब तक उसको याद रखोगे, दुश्मन तक को भूल चुके हो, हमको कब तक याद रखोगे. And I felt like, this, my dad has written a lot of poems, but I think he wrote this one for Abba. And not a lot of people knew it. And it's something that, when he died, these words stay with me. And if you can understand the depth of what my dada is trying to say, then you'll understand that my father's legacy is written in blood. Unfortunately, it's not he was murdered in the most brutal manner, but the only two organs of his that survived were his heart and his mind, and they were untouched. And like I said, he left a legacy much bigger than me. So you know, दुश्मन तक को भूल चुके हो, हमको कब तक याद रखोगे. I
Wow.
hope that stays with my country, and I hope Abba said something that as a son I always felt that I wish I was with my father in his last moments, because he felt like this, and he wrote that I won't give up on Asiya even if I'm the last man standing. And I always felt like, I wish my father never had to write that or feel that. I wonder where he must have been in his last few days, where he felt that, I'm the last man standing and there's no one with me, but I'm going to keep fighting. And I hope that Salman Taseer is not the last man standing, and that there are always men and women who fight for what's right.
थैंक यू वेरी मच शाबाश. और मैं बस इतना कहूँगा चलते चलते कि आपकी जो भी बातें हैं मैंने जैसे भी सुनी, वो दो जगह आपसे बातें करती हैं. यानी आपकी जो कहानी है वो दो जगह असर भी करती है, एक दिल पे और दिमाग पे. दिमाग बार बार ये सोचता है कि ये जो कुछ भी हुआ मज़हब के नाम पे, ये एक लेवल पे कहीं बड़ा फ्रॉड था. और वो सिलसिला जो फ्रॉड का है वो आपके जो वालिद साहब हैं सलमान तासीर साहब, उनके असैसिनेशन से शुरू होता है, जिसमें कोई मतलब नहीं था उनको इस तरह से मारने का, और उसके बाद में फिर कोई मतलब नहीं था आपको किडनैप करने का. उसका कोई मज़हब से ताल्लुक़ नहीं था, उसका किसी किस्म की तहरीक से कोई ताल्लुक़ नहीं था. क्या बदनसीबी है. और अनफॉर्चुनेटली this happened, but then you have written such a beautiful book and people are liking it, they're reading it, and we will run details about your book on this program. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It was such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for having me. Really.
Thank you.